Forget everything you think you know about pirate curses. The truth is darker than any ghost story ever told. 7 vessels of the Golden Age of Piracy were doomed not by ghosts, but by the men aboard them. A lantern sways above a salt-warped deck. The wood groans. In the dark, a bell tolls out of rhythm. For 3 centuries, sailors swore these hulls were marked, hexed by murdered slaves and by broken oaths sworn. But the ledgers tell another story. The admiralties knew, the insurers knew, the survivors, when permitted to speak, knew. 7 hulls, 7 graves, and 1 shared executioner walked freely between them, protected by paper and by silence. To understand what sank them, one must first understand the sea they sailed under the black flag. The Golden Age of Piracy spanned the 1650s to the 1720s, 7 decades of proxy wars. Spain hoarded silver from the New World. England, France, and the Dutch Republic clawed for a share. In the gaps between their fleets rose a new mariner, answering to no crown, no company, only plunder. Their hunting grounds were free. The Caribbean, where sugar and slaves moved in convoys thick as smoke. The Atlantic seaboard, where the Carolinas and New England traded in silence with anyone paying in stolen coin. And the Indian Ocean, where Mughal treasure ships sailed almost unarmed, believing distance itself was their only defense. Between these corridors ran a chain of blood-soaked ports. Port Royal, Nassau, and St. Mary's of distant Madagascar. Taverns outnumbered churches 10-1. A man sold stolen cargo by morning and was knighted by nightfall. The legal architecture producing these men was called the letter of marque, parchment from a king authorizing raids. In wartime, the crown called them privateers. In peacetime, same men, same ships were hanged as pirates. Prize law, admiralty courts, imperial wrath, the line between service and treason, drawn in ink, never dried. Every cursed ship began as a crown's proud investment. Now consider the paradox at the heart of this story. The most feared vessels of the age, flagships, captured Indiamen, 60-gun terrors that emptied ports, sank fastest. Not small sloops vanishing into mangroves, nor leaky brigs limping between islands, but the giants, the legends, the names that made governors write panicked letters to London. Why? The rumor of a curse served powdered wigs. It explained, without embarrassment, why a royal squadron had failed to catch a single ragged captain for 2 years. It comforted underwriters at Lloyd's who had insured cargoes they never expected to lose beneath the black flag. And it silenced sailors' widows asking uncomfortable questions about rotted timber, unpaid wages, officers draining the powder ration. The sailors themselves believed. Of course they believed. Men living 6 months on salt pork and stagnant seawater, watching shipmates die of scurvy, fever, and the lash, navigating by dead reckoning through waters no chart had measured. Such men saw omens in every gall. But the court-martial records tell a colder and different tale entirely. Splintered keels, mutinous crews, captains ignoring the pilot, powder magazines stored beside galley fires, waiting to detonate. What admiralties buried was almost always a human name. The first name in that ledger was already burning. Ship 1. Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard's flagship. She began as La Concorde, a French slaver of 300 tons. Captured off Martinique, November 1717. Edward Teach, history knows him as Blackbeard, mounted 40 guns upon her deck and turned her into the most feared vessel in the Atlantic. For 7 months she ruled the Windward Passage. Merchant captains struck their colors at her approach. She blockaded Charleston for a week, holding a colonial city hostage. Then, in June of 1718, at Beaufort Inlet, North Carolina, she ran hard aground and broke her back. The official story was pilot error, but look closer. Blackbeard had just secured a royal pardon from Governor Eden. He had 300 men to feed from a shrinking share of plunder. Fortune, they say, favored the ruthless. Within days of the grounding, he marooned most of that crew on a barren sandspit and sailed away. He sailed off with loyalists and the best treasure. The grounding was no accident. It was a redundancy plan. Greed disguised as misfortune. Ship 2, Whydah galley, Samuel Bellamy's prize, graveyard of one of piracy's wealthiest crews. Like Queen Anne's Revenge, she was a slaver by birth, a three-masted galley of the Royal African Company, captured in the Bahamas, February 1717. Bellamy transferred his flag aboard and loaded her with plundered merchant wealth, the spoils of some 50 merchant ships, and the course set north to raid the New England coast. He never made port. On the night of April 26, 1717, a nor'easter caught her off Cape Cod. The Whydah was overloaded. 4.5 tons of silver and gold, sugar, indigo, ivory, and Jamaican rum. She could not answer her helm, struck a sandbar in 15 feet of water, 300 yards from shore. She rolled over in the surf. Of 146 men aboard, only 2 survived that black night. Bellamy, 28, the wealthiest pirate in history by modern reckoning, drowned within sight of land he never reached. Greed over seamanship, twice in 1 year. But the third hull was cursed before it ever set sail. Ship 3, Adventure Galley, William Kidd's flagship and perhaps the most damning proof the Crown itself sought piracy. She was purpose-built in Deptford, England, 1695. 287 tons, 34 guns, 150 men. 4 English lords personally invested, including the Lord Chancellor himself. Kidd's commission? Hunt pirates across the Indian Ocean. His investors expected a return. But the galley was flawed from her keel. Timbers green, cut too quickly. Fitted hastily to meet admiralty deadline. Within a year, she leaked so badly, pumps ran day and night. Her oars, she was one of the last great oared warships, splintered in their falls at sea. Her crew, unpaid and starving, off the coast of Madagascar, mutinied in all but name aboard her. When no pirates could be found, Kidd turned pirate himself, seizing the Armenian merchantman Kedak Merchant in January. 1798. Dooming his patrons back in London under the black flag he was hired to hunt down. By then, the Adventure Galley was beyond saving. Her worm-eaten hull forced Kidd to strip and scuttle her. He sailed home in the captured Kedak Merchant, believing his letter of marque would protect him. It did not. He was hanged at the execution dock in Wapping, and his investors quietly erased their names from the paperwork. The curse of the Adventure Galley was English shipwright fraud. Ship 4, Royal Fortune, flagship of Blackbeard. Bartholomew Roberts took more than 400 prizes in 3 years, the most successful pirate of the entire age. He drank only tea, hanged mutineers by his own hand, and forbade gambling and women aboard his ships. Under his command, the black flag flew from the coast of Newfoundland to the mouth of the Congo River. Off the African coast at Cape Lopez, Gabon, on February 10, 1722, HMS Swallow finally found him. The Swallow, a 50-gun frigate under Captain Challoner Ogle, disguised herself as a merchantman and closed to pistol range. She fired a full broadside into the Royal Fortune. Most of Robert's crew were drunk on captured Portuguese wine. The powder monkeys stumbled about the deck. The gun crews could not find their matches in the smoke. Roberts stood on the quarterdeck in a crimson waistcoat, a diamond cross at his throat, pistols in his belt. A charge of grapeshot from the Swallow's second broadside struck him in the throat. He died instantly. When the Royal Fortune finally struck her colors, discipline had already collapsed alongside her fallen captain's body. 272 men were taken prisoner. 52 of them were hanged in chains along the Gold Coast. The Royal Fortune was towed to Cape Coast Castle and broken apart for firewood by British soldiers. Then came the ship no admiralty in London would ever dare name aloud, buried in silence forever. Pause here. Consider what these 4 ships share. Not a spectral hand, not a witch's curse, no vengeful ghost. Everyone was doomed by something men did on their own decks. Greed, negligence, fraud, and drink. The word cursed, whispered in Port Royal taverns and printed in Grub Street pamphlets, was merely a cover story. It served the admiralties, who preferred mystery to malfeasance, and the insurers, who paid readily on acts of God. It served surviving crews, who could plead the influence of dark forces instead of confessing outright to mutiny. And it served something older, the Protestant merchant conscience built on the sugar trade and the Middle Passage. If the ships were cursed, the wealth they carried was clean. If men were bewitched, their bankrollers were innocent. Fortune favored the ruthless, until the ruthless were caught, and then fortune became fate, and fate became superstition. Superstition became a wall of silence behind which the true accounts could rot quietly in peace, unread forever. Insurance fraud, scapegoats, silence. The truth behind the myth was always ledger paper. 3 ships remain, each worse. Ship 5, the Fancy. Henry Avery's flagship, the vessel that triggered the first coordinated global manhunt in history. Avery, a former Royal Navy officer, led a mutiny aboard the privateer Charles II in May 1694. He renamed her the Fancy and sailed her to the Indian Ocean under the black flag, hunting rich prey. In September 1695, he ambushed the Mughal treasure fleet in the Red Sea, a catastrophic imperial blow. The thrice was the Ganj-i-Sawai, Emperor Aurangzeb's pilgrimage ship returning from Mecca, laden with gold and royal courtiers. East India Company archives record the 2 days aboard with a plainness no cinematic account has ever matched. Men tortured for hidden coin, women thrown into the sea. When every screw departed, she was a floating tomb. The Mughal emperor's fury nearly ended English trade in India. The East India Company itself was forced to compensate. The crown set a bounty on Avery's head of £1,000, a common seaman's lifetime wages. 6 of Avery's men were captured and hanged at Wapping, but the captain himself vanished into the salt air. The Fancy sailed to the Bahamas, then to Ireland, and then out of the historical record entirely. Some say he lived quietly in Devon under a false name. Others say he died a beggar in Bideford. The world's first global manhunt found nothing. The Fancy is the only ship here whose captain the sea spared. Ship 6. Revenge, Stede Bonnet's sloop, and the most tragicomic entry in the entire pirate ledger of the age. Bonnet was a Barbadian sugar planter, a major in the militia, a man of education and considerable inheritance. He had a wife, he had children, he had, by every account, no reason on earth to turn pirate. In the spring of 1717, he bought a sloop, mounted 10 guns, and hired a crew at wages. Pirates never took wages, and yet Bonnet set sail as a gentleman brigand under the black flag. He was, by all accounts, appalling at it, could not navigate, could not command, could not keep his crew. His crew mutinied within months, handed the ship to Blackbeard, who kept Bonnet as hostage guest for nearly a year. When Bonnet reclaimed the Revenge in 1718, he took a pardon and sailed under the name Captain Thomas. He called his ship the Royal James and tried to reform, but the thin disguise fooled no one. In August 1718, Colonel William Rhett cornered him in the mouth of the Cape Fear River. After a 5-hour battle in the shallows, Bonnet surrendered and was taken to Charleston in heavy iron chains. He escaped once, dressed in women's clothes, and was recaptured within days by the militia hunting him down. On the 10th of December 1718, he was hanged at White Point before a crowd gathered to watch. Amateur command met professional executioner. The Revenge herself was sold to pay court costs. The log ends mid-sentence. Ship 7, Speaker. John Bowen's flagship in the Indian Ocean. The least remembered and precisely why she matters. Speaker was a slaver of 450 tons and 36 guns, taken by Bowen at Aden. Built for the Bristol trade, refitted for the pirate trade, she became the terror of the Mozambique Channel. Bowen's own crew were veterans, former men of Avery, of Kidd, of the collapsed pirate settlements at St. Mary's. They struck along the Malabar coast, taking Indiamen and Arab dhows with equal appetite through that long autumn. By 1702, the Speaker's hold was so laden with plunder, she rode dangerously low in water. Bowen was warned. His French pilot Legouze, taken aboard at Réunion, knew the Mauritius reefs were unforgiving. The ship was too heavy to answer sail in a squall, and the sea would soon collect its debt. On the night of January 7th, 1702, the Speaker struck the outer reef of Mauritius in darkness. The pilot, by every surviving account, was drunk. The ship broke up within hours. Most of the crew reached shore. The Dutch governor, corrupt and cash poor, agreed to look the other way for a share of the salvaged treasure. Bowen and a handful of men took another vessel and escaped to Madagascar, where fever killed most within a year. The survivors were rounded up by East India Company frigates in 1704 and hanged in Bombay. What sank her was overloaded plunder and a drunken pilot, not a curse. A choice. 7 wrecks, 1 verdict. Look now at the pattern. Queen Anne's Revenge. A captain's calculated betrayal of his own crew for gold. Whydah. Cargo greed against a nor'easter. Adventure Galley. Corrupt shipwrights and admiralty haste rushing her back out. Royal Fortune. Drink and complacency under the guns of a professional navy hunting beneath royal colors. Fancy. The atrocity that made her captain the most wanted man alive across 2 oceans and 3 empires. Revenge. A gentleman's vanity in a trade that killed professionals. Speaker. Overloading, drink, and a bribed governor. Mutiny, rot, hubris, storm, navy, greed, drink. 7 ships, 7 human failures, not 1 demon in the ledger, not 1 hex, not 1 vengeful spectre walking the midwatch. The admiralties preferred the word cursed above all, because it foreclosed the harder questions. Why were royal shipyards selling green timber to the crown's own fleets? Why were colonial governors on the take and pardoned pirates handed fresh commissions signed with royal seals? Why were the treasure convoys of the Mughal Empire being escorted in the end by no one at all? Their legacy outlasted the timbers. Robert Louis Stevenson read the old trial accounts and gave the word Treasure Island. Hollywood took the black flag and turned it to costume. Tricorn, parrot, buried chest and wooden leg. All of it descends from the pamphlet trade that first published the trial transcripts of these very men. It stripped from those transcripts the parts that did not sell. The darker weight the trade preferred forgotten. What pop culture still edits out is the sugar economy, the middle passage, the letters of marque. Those letters made kings the silent partners of murderers, the lawless truth. One captain's fall still waits. If you want to know how the captain who outlived them all finally met his brutal, lonely end, the one man who slipped every rope, every reef, every frigate the crown ever sent after him, the next video is already waiting on the channel. Subscribe and raise the black flag with us. There are more stories beneath the wave.